Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you this morning. Go ahead and stand and sing with us this morning. We've waited for this day. We're gathered in your name, calling out to you. Your glory like a fire, awakening desire will burn our hearts with truth. You're the reason we're here. You're the reason we're singing. Open up the heavens, we want to see you. Open up the floodgates.
everybody. We're so glad that you're here today and celebrating with us at Movement. And I think you just picked a great day to be here on a lot of levels. But let me just start by saying this. If this is your first time here, I just want to extend a special welcome to you. And I would just like to say welcome. Would love the chance to meet you. My name is Eric, and I'm going to be hanging out after our time in here together. I'll be hanging out in the Next Steps area, which is just across the hallway. I'd love the chance to meet you, but I'd love to just ask you to do something really quick this morning. If you're new here, or shoot, if you've been here, 100 times or however many times, love for you to take a minute to fill out the connection card, the Connect card. I always call it a connection card. And the reason I call it a connection card is because we believe in the power of connection. We believe in the power of relationships. Hopefully, if you're new here, you've seen that already. You've connected with someone already this morning, and they've introduced themselves, and we really are all about relationships. So take a minute, fill out the Connect card. You can do that by scanning the QR code on the back of your seat, or you can do that by filling out a hard copy, which is in your seat back. And we just love to know that you're here with us. We'd love to help you connect, because the truth of the matter is the power of community is not found on just gathering on a Sunday. The power of community is really building relationships where we can walk with each other spiritually, live out our mission, which is to help people find and follow God, and that happens in the context of relationships. So we'd love to connect with you. Also, if you're new or you've never filled out a card, by filling that out today, we're going to make a $5 contribution on your behalf to Lifeline Christian Mission. Lifeline is a partner of ours, both in Guatemala, as we serve alongside of a really incredible team there, led by a pastor by the name of Davey, and their work in Guatemala is they're planting churches and serving people, and then also we feed people globally through Lifeline as we pack meals and send them all over the globe. And so by being here today, filling out that card, you get to be a part of that mission with us. So that's really super cool. So also, as I'm up here, I want to just invite you to join me next week. Join us next week, July 3rd. So that's next Sunday. We're going to have one gathering we're calling our summer celebration. One of my favorite things about summer is just the environment and the atmosphere of celebrating together, of just having community and having some fun together. And so that's what we're going to do next week. We're going to have one celebration, just a 10:30 celebration. It's going to be in this space, but also outside of the space as well. We're going to have food, and there's going to be barbecue and some other stuff to eat, and we're going to hang out. There's going to be some activities that the kids can engage in, just some yard games and stuff. So be a part of that. Come be a part of that celebration next Sunday. Invite friends to come and to be a part of it as well. It's going to be a great day, so you're not going to miss that. Also, I just want to invite you into a time of generosity, and just speak into that for a moment. Every week we talk about the power of generosity, that it's something that we value. It really is a heartbeat of ours around this place. But honestly, it's a heartbeat. It's not just a heartbeat of ours. It's really God's heartbeat, is to be a giver, and that's in every way, shape, and form. But the power of generosity and the power of this time where we invite you into giving is it allows us to sort of step back and say, okay, God, everything I have is yours. I put my trust in you. I put my and that's like every part of our lives. But a lot of times it begins with just saying, God, you're over everything, including my finances. And so this is just a great opportunity to practice generosity. You can scan that QR code on your seat, or if you there's some envelopes there as well. And so there are 2 drop boxes, both for your Connect card and also giving envelopes. There's one in the auditorium and one out in the lobby. So would love for you to be a part of those things. But for now, we're going to continue in our series called Detours, and I'm super pumped for you to hear Ellen today.
Well, good morning. How's everyone doing today? Good, excellent. And my name is Ellen, as Eric mentioned, and it's great to be with you today. And also, happy summer, right? It's officially summer. I know most of us have been in summer mode for a little bit now, but technically, it's officially summer as of Tuesday. So now we're in summer, and also, I think this time of year, once that actually turns that official day of summer, first day of summer, I find that these are the days that just start slipping away from me, right? Where time just is flying and it won't slow down, and I try to soak up every moment and it still gets away from me. So I hope that you're able to soak in some of the summertime. But I also feel like this message series has kind of felt like that, where time has been flying by. We've spent the past 3 weeks and now week 4 this week in Joseph's story in Scripture. So we've been exploring his journey, and we've called this series Detours simply because Joseph's story has a lot of twists and turns, and it feels like these past few weeks in Joseph's story have just flown by, but we've also covered quite a bit of ground because there's so much to his story. But I want to remind you, especially in case you haven't been with us for this series, we have this definition that we've been revisiting every week of what a detour is, what we want to begin to see it as, because sometimes we see a detour as something that takes us on a longer or an unexpected path, but instead we've been exploring this new definition of detours that says this: a detour is a change in our plans that God uses to develop our character and to develop our competency so that we can arrive at a better destination. And so hopefully, if you have been with us for the past few weeks, God is starting to shift your perspective and how you see the detours that maybe you've already experienced or likely will experience down the road. And as I think about detours, I think the analogy that we often use is traffic detours. And I think there are plenty of situations where in a traffic detour, we find ourselves in a place where we're stuck, as in traffic comes to a standstill. Has anybody ever been in a traffic jam kind of situation like that? Yes, I see lots of looks of dismay. I don't know about you, but when I'm in that situation, that's far worse than if I'm going along at, even if it's just 5 miles an hour. As long as we're moving, it feels like there's forward progress, like there's hope that we're going to get there. But if we're stopped and there's no way out, I struggle in that situation. I struggle and I start to feel pretty frustrated. And so hopefully I'm not alone in that. But today we're getting to a part of Joseph's story where I think we get to learn about what it might look like to avoid a detour where we would find ourselves feeling stuck. Okay? So I want to wrap through just a little summary of what we've been through in Joseph's life thus far in his story. So quickly, we'll go through where Joseph has been, what we've learned about him. So we find out that, Joseph grew up in a pretty messy family, messy to the point that his brothers sell him into slavery. That's pretty messy. That's his first detour. And then from there, he ends up undeservingly in prison. And so there's another pretty significant detour. We actually find that during his time in prison, God is very present with Joseph, present to the point that his favor is with him and his kindness is with him. And God actually grants Joseph this ability to interpret dreams while he's in prison. And so this leads to an opportunity where he's able to interpret a dream for Pharaoh himself, the leader of Egypt. And this is a pretty significant situation because this dream that Pharaoh has that he can't understand, it's actually about a drought that the land of Egypt is facing and the surrounding land is facing. And Joseph is the one that's able to interpret it because of God. And he also is able to help Pharaoh see a plan for how they might manage this severe drought and the famine along with it. And so this is the point where we're picking up Joseph's story, where we see that because of his ability to interpret this dream, that Pharaoh removes him from his situation in prison, and now he's made into this position where he's the right-hand man of Pharaoh, and he's able to make all the decisions about food distribution for all of Egypt and for anyone who comes to Egypt looking for food. And so we see this kind of portion of Joseph's story where things are changing, where he's now in this place of prominence. And we also see that it's been about 20 years, 20 some years since his brothers sold him into slavery. And in those 20 years, his brothers now end up in a place where they're experiencing the same exact drought that Joseph is experiencing in Egypt. And because of that, they actually make the decision that they need to travel to, of all places, Egypt, to be able to beg for grain so that they'll survive this drought as well. So we kind of see things come full circle where it's been 20 some years since Joseph has interacted with his brothers that initially sold him into slavery, and now we see this situation where they're going to end up back in the same place. But let's think to those 20 some years that Joseph has experienced in the meantime. And I think if we were in his shoes, think about how much time he must have spent over those 20 some years thinking one thought: this is all their fault. Like, think about how easy it would have been for him to sit in that spot of placing blame on his brothers because they made one decision that just changed the trajectory of where he ended up. And it would have been really easy for him to ruminate on that in all sorts of different situations. Think about him in prison, how much time he could have spent sitting there thinking, this is all their fault, all of this misfortune that I've experienced. And I think if we're honest, we can find ourselves in that similar place of ruminating on maybe something that's happened to us because of somebody else's poor decisions, right? And maybe we've spent a lot of our time and energy thinking about how this is all their fault. Whatever we're facing is all their fault. And maybe we've held on to that for a long, long time. And I don't know what situation that might be for you. You know, maybe for you it was a work situation where you had a coworker that you were working together as a team, and you thought that you were on the same path and helping one another out, and then you come to find out that that person actually, in the midst of that, they took advantage of all of your hard work and used it to advance their own career. And maybe you've spent a lot of time thinking about how you're just holding on to wanting them to face a consequence for that, holding on to that anger. Or maybe for you, it has to do with your family. You know, maybe growing up, you had a parent that made a decision, and that decision maybe caused a lot of brokenness in your family. And maybe you've held on to that for a long, long time, thinking, man, where our family ended up, it's all their fault. I think we've all experienced at least one instance like that. And it's real and it's raw. And so if Joseph was human, which he was, like we are, we have to imagine that he probably spent plenty of time thinking some of those negative thoughts toward his brothers, right? So let's pick up in his story, because we're going to find that since they're landing in the same spot now, he's going to have a chance to figure out what he wants to do with any of that negativity and past hurt that he's held on to. So let's jump into Genesis 42. We're going to start in verse 6, where it says, "Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. And as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he immediately recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger, and he spoke harshly to them. 'Where do you come from?' he asked." And now remember, Joseph hasn't seen his brothers in 20 some years, but he notices who they are right away. He immediately recognizes them. No matter how much they've changed in those 20 years, he's able to pinpoint who they are right away. And I think that tells us something about how much we hold on to a memory of someone who's hurt us, right? Like, he recognized his brothers immediately. And I think it also just shows us that we see his gut reaction is to speak harshly to them. And I think that's just some of that lingering anger just coming out, because that's his initial response, is to deal with his brothers harshly. And I think it's because in this situation he was faced with a question, and in situations like these we're faced with the same question. And that question is, what do we do with the hurt that we've held on to from our past? what do we do with that kind of hurt that we've held on to for so long? Because it's real, and I think we've all experienced that level of hurt. And I think if we could acknowledge it, I think most of us, maybe it's landed us in a place where we've felt stuck at some level because we've been stuck in this inability to move past our pain. And I think that one of the most difficult things that we try to figure out in this life is, how do we not let our past pain, the pain that we've experienced, control the narrative of our future? Because I think maybe for a lot of us, maybe we haven't realized it, but we've allowed that pain to kind of be the filter through which we process so many things that come our way in life. And it starts to impact the place that we end up, too. It can take us in a pretty significant detour. And I think that God wants to show us a different way in Joseph's story, in this part of his story specifically. And I'm going to run through what we see happen next here. And first, Joseph, even though he immediately recognized his brothers didn't recognize him at all. They didn't catch on that this was Joseph, which, to be fair, why would they have? They didn't know that he ended up in Egypt. And if I were one of his brothers, I would not be on the lookout for Joseph. He would be the last person I would want to run into just in this kind of a situation. And so they don't recognize him, but he starts off by deciding to claim that they're spies. He accuses them of being spies and says that that's why they've ended up in Egypt, and he chooses to throw them in prison. And I think this is a really interesting first decision, because part of me wonders if part of the reason that he threw them in prison was so that they would feel like this little glimpse of what he experienced, because he ended up in prison undeservingly. Or I also wonder if maybe he just needed to buy himself a little bit of time to figure out how he was going to respond and what he wanted to do. I know I've been in plenty of situations where I think, if I just had a little bit more time to process this and make a decision. And I suppose that throwing your brothers in prison for a few days buys you a little bit more time, I guess. I guess that's one way to do it. However, he lets them sit there for a few days, pulls them back out of prison, and says, okay, I'll make you a deal, because he realizes that actually his youngest brother, Benjamin, is not there. Only 10 of his 11 brothers are there. So he says, I'll make you a deal. What I want you to do is go back home, get your youngest brother, Benjamin, and come back. I'll even send you home with the grain that you came for, that I promised I would give you. I'll give you that. You can go home and get your youngest brother and return. And in the meantime, I'm going to hold Simeon, one of your other brothers, in prison. And the brothers talk it over for a few minutes and think, all right, this sounds like a pretty good deal. Poor Simeon, right? He must have drawn the short straw or something like that. So he ends up staying in prison. And actually, if we read this story, we find that there's quite a bit of time that passes in between that the brothers make their way home. And they actually end up staying there for quite a while. They stay and they take advantage of the grain that's been given to them. And they actually wait until they end up in a place of being a little bit more desperate for needing more food to return back to Egypt. So we find that it's actually about 2 years that they go before they return to Egypt. And in the meantime, I'm sure Simeon is thinking, I really thought that they were planning to come back for me. But also, Simeon, you should remember that these are the same brothers that sold Joseph into slavery 20 years ago. So I don't know that I would trust them to come back for you, right? However, they do get to a point where they decide, all right, we have to return to Egypt. We're out of food. We need to go back, and we'll bring Benjamin this time. We'll bring him because that's our end of the deal. So they return to Egypt again. They have Benjamin with them this time, and we find this. In Genesis 43, it says, as Joseph looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and he looked for a place to weep. he went into his private room and he wept there. I think we can feel the gravity of this situation, of those 20-some years just kind of hitting in this one point where all of that pain and all of that emotion, Joseph's experiencing it all at once. And for him, it took the form of tears. That's how it overflowed. And I know for most of us here, maybe we haven't held on to resentment in a certain situation for 20-some years. Maybe we haven't held on to anything quite that long, or maybe we have. But I'm wondering if maybe a lot of us here, maybe we've held on to some pain in our lives, and maybe, I think if a lot of us here were able to examine what we're holding on to, I think maybe we've spent a lot of time trying to ignore some pain that's been lingering, some pain that maybe our bodies have been holding on to. I think some of us are feeling physical pain because of bitterness and resentment that we've held on to for a long, long time. And I don't know, for me, if I'm being honest, I think oftentimes I don't allow myself to be still enough to actually be able to acknowledge the pain that I'm holding on to. I don't allow myself to slow down long enough to listen for what my body is holding on to that it wasn't intended to. And I think that it would be really valuable for us to take a moment this morning to just be present in that and maybe to notice what God wants us to see that we've been holding on to for a long time. And I know that it might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I still want to invite you into this. And what I want to invite you into is I just want you to close your eyes for just a moment. And I know that might feel awkward, but I promise I'm not going to play any pranks on you while your eyes are closed. I just want you to close your eyes for just a moment. We'll just spend a quick moment here, but I want you to just pay attention to what your body's holding on to, and I want you to notice if there's just any pain. Maybe for some of us, we can notice it right away. Maybe there's a part of our body where we can literally feel that there's tension in our muscles that we haven't let go of for a long, long time. Maybe you feel a sensation of heaviness or of something weighing on you. Maybe you can feel it in your chest or in your heart. Maybe it feels like a tightness. Maybe you can feel it in your shoulders. Maybe it really feels like you have a weight that you've been carrying for far too long. Maybe for some of us, we can feel it in our lungs. We can almost feel that even if we tried to, we wouldn't be able to take a full, deep breath, even if we wanted to. And I just want you to take note of what you notice, of what maybe God is pinpointing that you've been holding, maybe just for a little bit too long. And I want you to be able to name what it is and where it is. And I think it's important that if we can identify if there's someone that we feel like we've held responsible for that pain. Maybe it's someone else who made a poor decision and we've been carrying the pain ever since. Maybe it's ourselves. Maybe we feel like we've caused it. But I want us to also be able to pinpoint who that is if we know. And I want us to just breathe for a moment and not sweep it under the rug. And if we notice it, not to ignore it, but just breathe for just a moment. And I'd like you to open your eyes now. And I don't know what came to your mind, what you noticed, but I think that God doesn't want you to overlook that. And in the seat back in front of you, there's a blank note card. And I just encourage you, if there was something that you took note of, I just want you to write it down, because I think it would be easy for us to walk away from this and continue to move at such a fast pace that we don't notice what we're carrying, and I don't think that that's what God has for us. And you can even continue to just be attentive throughout our time this morning. And if there's something that you notice that you feel like it would be important to write down, I'd invite you to do that. And from here, I think we get to jump back into Joseph's story and admit that, I think he was carrying a lot of physical pain in his body from 20-some years of just these detours that he knew were a result of a decision that his brothers initially made. And so we see that overflow, that emotion overflow in the form of tears, and then he kind of composes himself and he comes back out to be in the presence of his brothers, and he acts like he's just going to send them home, to say, all right, you brought your brother Benjamin with you, you came back for more grain, okay, you held up your end of the deal, I'm going to send you home. But in the background, we find that he actually has a plan behind the scenes, and he has actually taken a silver cup that belongs to him, which is a symbol of his high position in Pharaoh's courts, and he's hidden that silver cup inside of one of Benjamin's bags. And this is his plan. He's hidden that, and he sends his brothers, he sends them back home, acts as though he's going to let them go. And they get a few miles down the road, and he sends his men after them, and they're surrounded, and the brothers are confused because they're being accused of stealing this silver cup that belonged to Joseph. And they say, we have nothing to do with this. We don't even know what silver cup you're talking about. Quite honestly, if it's found in our possession, we're deserving of death because we did not steal anything. We're not sure what you're talking about. And so they're brought back before Joseph, and their bags are opened. And sure enough, in Benjamin's bag, there's the silver cup. And the brothers are just distraught. I mean, they're beside themselves because they have no idea how this happened. And now they know, well, Benjamin is now deserving of death because we claimed that we didn't take this. And in fact, it's been found in his bag. And I think what's interesting is this is how we see Joseph respond. He's done at this point. He's not able to hold it any longer. He tells everyone else to leave the room besides his brothers. And he says, Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. And when they had done so, he said, I'm your brother, Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed. And do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. I mean, there have to be multiple levels of shock that his brothers are experiencing right now. First off, to figure out that this, in fact, is Joseph standing in front of them. And then second of all, to hear from him these words of, don't be distressed, don't be angry with yourselves. I mean, I'm sure that if they ever envisioned interacting with him again or coming across him again, this is not how they imagined that it would go. Because what does Joseph choose? Instead of choosing to punish them, he chooses forgiveness. He chooses to forgive the unforgivable. It's like he's saying, hey, all those decisions that you made years ago that changed the trajectory of my life, I know that changed things for me and that I ended up in a different spot than I ever imagined, but I'm still choosing forgiveness. And we even see that down the road, Joseph says to his brothers, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. And I want us to pay attention to that statement because I think it tells us something about what forgiveness is not. Because Joseph here, he says, you intended to harm me. He notices that his brothers had malicious intentions, and he doesn't sweep them under the rug. He doesn't ignore the fact that his brothers had it out for him, and he doesn't condone their behavior or try to act like they had pure intentions. And so what I want you to hear in that is that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It doesn't mean that we sweep under the rug what happened. It doesn't mean that we give the other person credit for having pure intentions when they didn't. And it certainly doesn't mean that we necessarily place our trust in that person right away again. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And I think the other thing that we have to remember Because sometimes we get stuck in, we get forgiveness confused. And we think that it's something that it's not. And so we need to know what it's not. And the other thing that it's not is forgiveness is not fair. It's not when someone chooses to do something that they willingly choose to cause another person pain. What they deserve is not forgiveness. It's not. And, it's interesting. Joseph's offer of forgiveness, it isn't based on anything about the situation being fair, right? He doesn't choose forgiveness because it's fair. So if forgiveness isn't fair, and if it doesn't mean that we're forgetting what has happened, then what is forgiveness? What does it mean? And why do we choose it? Why? And Jesus gives this picture of what forgiveness means when he talks about how to pray. So he's talking about how to pray, and he references forgiveness by saying, "Forgive us our debts as we also forgive our debtors." So he uses this financial term as if to say, forgiveness means letting go of what someone owes you. That's what forgiveness means. It means to say, they don't owe me anymore. Even when they do, even in Joseph's case where his brothers made a decision and he could have easily said that they owed him, he chooses to forgive, to say that they don't owe him anymore. And I think that he shows us a specific reason to forgive. And Joseph, part of the reason that he forgives is because he's able to see God's hand at work in what's happened, right? He says, "It was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." So Joseph is saying, because I can see what God was using this for, I'm going to choose to forgive. But I want to be really honest with you all. I don't think our story will always look like Joseph's. Like, we won't always be able to see exactly how God's hand was at work when someone makes a decision that hurts us. We might not always be able to say with clarity, hey, this is exactly how God was working and I can see it. But there's another reason that we get to choose to forgive. And that reason is this: it's because we've received undeserved forgiveness through Jesus. We get to choose to forgive because we've received forgiveness first. We've been forgiven. It's the gospel, right? When we were deserving of sin, Jesus died. He gave his life so that we might receive forgiveness, so that we might be made righteous because of his sacrifice. And for those of us who follow Jesus with our lives, that's the reason. That's the reason that we get to forgive, that we get to choose forgiveness. And there's no part of this that's easy. It's not easy, and oftentimes forgiveness, it doesn't make sense. It's not the sensible decision. And Jesus even kind of confirms this with a conversation with his disciples where he says to them, he starts off by saying, things that cause people to stumble are bound to come. They're going to happen. There are going to be situations where someone lets you down, where they hurt you, where they maybe even betray you. But then he goes on to say, if someone sins against you 7 times in a day, that you are to forgive them. 7 times in a day, you are to forgive them. And his disciples respond with this. They say, increase our faith. And I think that's the most honest gut reaction. It's like they're saying to Jesus, hey, we're going to admit right off the bat, we 100% cannot forgive in that way. Like, we're just not capable of it on our own. We know that absolutely will not happen in our own strength. So you're going to have to increase our faith so that we might be able to forgive in that way, to be able to choose grace instead of choosing to be offended. I mean, what would our stories look like if we took every opportunity where we wanted to choose to be offended, where we felt like we had reason to be offended, and chose grace instead? What kind of story would that tell to the people around us? I think we've all been on both sides of this equation, though, right? We've all been in the place where we've been on the receiving end of somebody's poor decisions, and it's caused us pain. And we've found ourselves in a spot where we have an opportunity to choose forgiveness, to choose to say, the other person doesn't owe me anything. But we've also been on the end of the equation where we've caused somebody else quite a bit of pain. And we've been in need of forgiveness. And I know I've been on both sides of that. I know that I've caused other people pain in a way where when I asked for forgiveness, it wasn't always offered. Like, that's the level of pain that I've caused in other people's lives at certain points. And I've also experienced significant detours in my life and my family's life because of poor decisions that someone made. And it took years of detours and twists and turns to get to a place of forgiveness, of being able to choose, that person doesn't owe me. I think we've experienced both sides of it, and I think that God has something more for us than choosing to stay stuck in a place where we are in unforgiveness and bitterness and resentment. He has so much more for us than that. And honestly, he designed us. We're designed to be image bearers. And one of the most significant ways that we bear his image is by forgiving, because he first forgave us. That's how we reflect his image to the people around us. And so the question is, what does God want to do with the hurt that we've held on to from the past? What does God want to do with it? Because we've been holding it for far too long. And I believe that he really does want us to let go of what we thought was owed to us. He wants us to say, that person doesn't owe me anymore. And he wants us to experience the freedom and the peace and the purpose that comes in that place. And I think he also wants us to choose forgiveness because it's going to point back to the forgiveness that was offered to us on the cross. And because of that, I want to wrap up our time together this morning with communion, because it just feels like that's the most fitting way to remember the forgiveness that we have been offered, right? Why do we practice communion? Why do we take time to do this? It's because it's an act of remembering. It's the way that we remember the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross. And what I want you to partake in today, you'll notice that there are 2 tables here up front for you to come forward and practice communion, but also on those tables, there's a basket on each table, and that's because I know for some of you, as we took a moment to pay attention to the lingering pain that we've been holding on to, some of you wrote something down. You wrote something down that you noticed that you've been holding on to, and maybe even you wrote down somebody's name, maybe someone that you've been holding on to feeling like they owe you something. And if you did what I invite you to do, when you come forward for communion, I want to invite you to take that note card that you wrote on, and I want you to just leave it here. I want you to practice communion and remember the forgiveness that you've been offered, and I want you to lay before God that pain that you've been holding on to for too long, because I believe that he wants you to be free from that. And I believe that he wants to increase your faith to a point that you're able to step into forgiveness, to say that I'm not owed anything anymore. So I'm going to pray over us, and the band will lead us in a song, and that'll be your opportunity to come forward and practice communion and bring to God anything that you've been carrying that you believe he's inviting you to lay before him. So we'll pray together now. God, we just acknowledge the depth of the forgiveness that's been offered to us through the sacrifice that your son made on the cross. God, we're undeserving of that level of forgiveness. We know that while we were yet in sin, Christ died for us. God, we rejoice and we praise you for your mercy and your grace and your forgiveness. And God, we also ask that you would increase our faith. Increase our faith to be able to choose grace. To choose grace instead of bitterness, to choose grace instead of resentment. God, for those of us here this morning that have been holding on to past pain for far too long, God, I pray that it would be your hand at work in their heart that would allow them to let go of that. To say, you don't owe me anymore. I'm not owed anything anymore. And God, more than anything, we just thank you for the sacrifice that Jesus made so that we might be forgiven, so that we might be made righteous through his blood. And it's in his precious name that we pray these things. Amen.
So while you're taking communion, the song that we're going to be singing is called Make Room, and God's timing is, it's never an accident. And it was Wednesday morning. We have our rehearsals Wednesday evenings, and it was Wednesday morning. I kind of had one of those moments where I realized I was trying to control my life in my own efforts, and kind of had this breakdown Wednesday morning, and went outside and spent time with God, and said, man, I didn't realize I was filling every second of my time with my own efforts to control my life, and I hadn't left any room for God. And that was a Wednesday morning, and then I remembered we were going to be rehearsing this song, Make Room, that evening. And it just felt like God was saying, well, yeah, so make room for me. You know, if you're in this spot, then maybe it's time to make some room. And so we're going to be singing this song while you take communion, and then we're going to have you, once you're done getting communion, just stay standing when you get back to your seats and use this song as your time to make room for God, for him to expose where you need some healing, where you need to let things go. So we'll start singing this song, and whenever you're done with communion, then you can just go ahead and stand in your spots and join us.
Where I lay it down, every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. And I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to, and I will make room do whatever you want to do whatever you want to, and I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. Here is where I lay it down. You are all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down. You are all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender. This is my surrender.
Let's pray. God, thank you so much for such a clear reminder that we need to leave space for you, and help us to anticipate experiencing you when we leave that space for you to work in us, for you to heal us, to help us to lay these things down that we can't do on our own. Would you help us to see clear ways this week where we can make space for you, and help us to trust that you're going to show up when we give you that control. God, we surrender, even if it's in baby steps. Help us to do that today and to do it throughout this week. We love you. Amen. You can have a seat.
All right. Well, hey, I would love to take a minute to just share a little bit of a story with you. And I think it's pretty fitting as we talk about detours. This is a detour story. So I'll just give you that heads up. I remember back to just a couple years ago, it was January of 2020. And we had just closed on this property that we're in here, this Ace Hardware building. Wasn't Ace Hardware. We just closed on the purchase of the property. We're anticipating a few months before we would then begin the construction process that would happen after that. And as I think everyone's pretty much aware of at this point, the spring of 2020 brought about a few different changes in our lives. And, I look back on that season. March came of 2020, and all of a sudden we had this building, but we no longer had a place to meet to have our Sunday celebrations, because we could no longer meet at Glenwood Middle School. We were meeting there at the time, and we couldn't meet there anymore. And there was really no other space to meet. And so something really interesting happened, and that is not only did we not have a place to meet, but the bank that we were working with that had helped us purchase the property came to us and said, hey, we know you've purchased this property, but we have some bad news for you. We can't lend you the money to finish off the project because of everything going on, economically and everything else. We've just decided we can't do that. And so, talk about a detour. We were in a space, we were in a place where we no longer had a place to gather on Sundays, and now we weren't sure what we were going to be able to do with the space that we're meeting in today. And I remember just taking a walk thinking, God, what are you trying to do here? What's this all about? And then we gathered our leadership team, and we started to ask some real questions like, what can we do? What's this next season look like? Do we need to sell this building? If we don't have the means to finish this off, do we just need to sell the facility? And what's next? And started to ask a lot of what's next questions, and just didn't know what the answers were. Well, it's about that time that we made a phone call to a friend of mine that worked for an organization called CFR, which stands for Christian Financial Resources. And I was just sharing our story, and he said, well, let me get you in contact with someone that might be able to help you. And we were able to connect with Kent from CFR. And I shared the mission and the vision of movement. I shared our story. I shared where we were at, and they said, man, we'd love to walk alongside of you. We'd love to help you fund this vision, make this a reality. And they believed in the vision, they believed in the mission, but even more than all that, they really believed in the heart of the local church, that God wanted to use the local church, in this case, movement in this community, to bring about change and transformation. And it was just one of those times in my life where I realized the power and the value of ministry partnerships, and why when you have a common understanding, a common vision, and a common purpose, this being, man, that people come to know Jesus, when that's there, God's able to do some really, really incredible things. And so once a year, we get the opportunity to hear from our ministry partner, CFR, and to hear just how, as a church, we can rally around the work that they're doing to help more people just like us. But even more than that, how you as individuals can be a part of that as well. And so in just a moment, I'm going to invite Kent up to join me. I'll tell you, Kent lives in Indianapolis area. He lives outside of Indy, but you need to hear this. He's a Buckeye, all right? He's from Ohio, OH, right? And so there we go. So you'll get to hear from Kent, and when he comes up, give him a warm welcome, a round of applause. But until then, let's watch this video real quick.
Every one of us is on a quest. Our quest is to live our lives in a way that we will one day hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Our challenge is to use what God has entrusted to us, our time, our talent, and our treasure, to accomplish His purposes. How can you do that? By investing in church and ministry projects that change lives. By giving wisely and creating a family legacy of generosity. By being faithful, whether you have little or much. At Christian Financial Resources, we believe God owns everything. And our task as Christians is to manage everything for God. Let's face the challenge together.
All right. Well, hey, everyone. Welcome, Kent. And yeah, man, thanks for being here. Thanks for your partnership. And honestly, like, this vision came to be because of your support and your ministry support. So, Kent, just if you would, just share with us how you help churches like Movement and beyond. How do you help churches?
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. Great to be back at Movement. Always love being here. Appreciate your leadership, and it's great just to hear that story be retold because it just illustrates what we're trying to do at CFR. We want to help fund ministry and change lives. We want to help churches do what they couldn't do without a ministry partner like CFR, because we just really serve a unique niche in terms of coming alongside churches to help fund their vision. Another quick story of a church we helped just a few months ago in Portsmouth, Ohio. They had built a new building 2 years ago, worked with another lender, and they were paying really high interest rates. We were able to lower their interest rate. We were able to take 10 years off the life of their loan, and it's going to save them $600,000 in interest payments alone, which is money that can go to ministry and missions. And that's what we want to do, help churches save money so they can direct funds to do ministry and do what God's called them to do.
Yeah, awesome. In the first celebration, I tried to get him to take 10 years off of our loan. It didn't work out yet. I haven't seen that happen yet. But seriously, I think about the power of people supporting churches. It's always unique that as you talk to, just lending organizations in the community, there's a God element, right? Like, it's funny, Ellen talked about faith today and having the faith to forgive, like, Jesus, give us the faith to be able to forgive like that. And I think the same thing is true when it comes to the finances of funding ministry, is like, give us the faith to do it. And you all have the faith to do it. And so that's really, really significant. Hey, tell me, or tell us, I should say, just in general, when you think about on an individual level, how can you help families and just what God's doing through them?
Yeah. In addition to having a heart for churches, we do have a heart for families and individuals who want to be good stewards, be good managers of the resources they have. And we really believe every person should have a kind of an emergency savings fund. And once you have that, it's great then to put it to work for you. And we have a couple of ways you can do that. We have a ready access certificate. There's brochures in your kind of seat backs there. Encourage you to grab those and find one of those as well. But the ready access is great because you can link it to your bank checking account. and you can park your emergency reserves in there. You can move money back and forth as often as you like without any penalties. There's no fees, there's no minimum term, and no limit on the number of transactions. And it's paying 2%. Starting July 1, which is an amazing interest rate. We also have some time certificates. If you're looking to invest for a little longer period of time, we have our 1-year certificate, which I think is on the screen behind me, paying 2.4%. We have up to 10-year time certificates paying upwards of 3%. You can also roll over old IRAs, old 401ks, get away from the volatility of the stock market and get a good fixed rate of return, and know your money is helping to grow churches. And that's what I love about CFR is that you're getting a return on your investment, but you know your investment is actually going to have an eternal return as you're helping churches all over the country.
Yeah, I think about just the power of that, and I know from a movement standpoint, we're invested as a church. You may not know this, but we have a ready access account, and we use that just as we go about how we operate organizationally and financially. And then, I just think about the power of it even from a family standpoint and why I want to be invested somewhere right now. There's, some poor guy like me pulling out the last of his hair trying to figure out how in the world anything's going to happen, and you come along and make it happen. And so talk to Kent. He'll be hanging out in the lobby area. Find out, just hear more of their passion for ministry. It's really super cool. And I love one of the powerful things about CFR is you don't just help, huge churches. You were just sharing about helping out, churches in, southeastern Appalachian region of Ohio to big cities to all over the country, really, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's exactly right. We have almost 400 ministry loans with churches and other ministries across the country. Just had one in Hawaii closed a couple weeks ago, and just had our first one in Connecticut. So we're in almost 40 states helping churches all over the country.
Man, Hawaii.
Yeah.
Right.
We're all signed up to try to volunteer to go do that update, but
right. All right. So, anyways, I just want to pray over CFR, and Kent, thanks for being here and just being a part of what God's doing. And so, if you would just join me in prayer, God, we just pray over the ministry of CFR, God, that you would bless them, God, that you would, as you already are, God, you're blessing them, you're multiplying their work and their efforts, God. You're increasing what they're able to do because of the vision that they have to serve the local church. And I don't know, sometimes we kind of ask the question of why, but you've chosen the local church. You've chosen the church to be your vehicle to bring about restoration and redemption and just broken places in this world, that the message of Jesus comes through churches like Movement and many, 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 many others. And so, God, would you just multiply and increase their effectiveness? God, would many people come to know the power of who Jesus is, the forgiveness that he offers, and God, we thank you for their work, and we thank you for our partnership, and we pray all this in Jesus' name, amen. So, hey, if you would, go say hey to Kent before you leave. He'll be hanging out there. But for now, next week, remember, 10:30, summer celebration. But for now, go be the church Movement. Have a great week.